No, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Yanez, and thank you for all the great work you do spreading the good word of naturopathic medicine. So, hi, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well today. Welcome to New York. My practice is right now, today I'm in Long Island. I have a practice in New York City and in Long Island. So, you are in Long Island today with me. So, thanks for being here. Uh, Getting a question. Okay. And let's see, it's a really beautiful sunny day here in New York. I hope it's really beautiful where you are, and I'm excited to talk to you about this material that I've been working on for the past couple of decades. So welcome. So I'm going to shut the video off, and we'll get started, and we'll look at the slide presentation. All right. All right, so we're going to talk about anxiety and depression today. Sorry, let me just get to the right screen function. Nope. There we go. Okay, so just a couple of disclosures. My practice is called Inner Source Health in Long Island and also in Huntington. I do formulate and consult for some nutraceutical companies, and then I am immediate past president of the New York Association of Naturopathic Physicians, where really our main goal right now is getting naturopathic medicine fully licensed in the state of New York, like it is in many other states, and every year more states are getting licensed. So it's a really exciting time in the profession to see it growing and to see it becoming so recognized and so part of medicine in this country. So hopefully good for everybody. Just a little bit about me. I went to college in Connecticut. I thought I wanted to go to medical school. I wasn't sure. I started doing research at Yale University to try to decide if I liked research. And from there, actually, my mentor brought me down to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, which was a really amazing opportunity to do research at a very high level. And we were studying mind-body medicine. Basically, we were studying the stress system and how the brain works when it gets stressed out, and how the immune system reacts in the brain. Because up until that time, we didn't really know that there was much immune system there. So we were looking at that, and while I was there, I was thinking about, well, maybe I'll do research and get an MD, PhD, or something like that. I had no knowledge of natural medicine. The only thing I knew about natural medicine was occasionally I went into a health food store, and I thought they smelled kind of strange, and I thought the people were kind of weird, and that's the only thing I knew about natural medicine up until that point, which just shows you how narrow-minded I was about it. And when I was about 22 and doing research down at NIH, I had a friend who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and after going to conventional doctors and not really getting much help, she went to this person who at the time I thought was some kind of quack, or I didn't know what it was, and it turned out it was a naturopath, and he helped her get better, and I saw the change in her by doing things, by changing her foods, by working on her stress, by working on getting her to an acupuncturist, all these things, and after conventional medicine really had nothing for her and she was getting worse and worse, this fellow helped her get better and better, and that kind of was my aha moment, when I started thinking more seriously about naturopathic school. So I decided to not go to the conventional route. I went to Bastyr University in Seattle, and I graduated in 2003, and I started my practice in 2004 here in New York. And I've written a couple of books on mental health and anxiety because I did have a research background in that, and that's something I had a special interest in, because when I got to New York, what I noticed is that pretty much everyone is on some kind of antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication. In fact, there was an article that just came out in the New York Times a couple of days ago saying how Xanax is the new Prozac, because in the 90s everybody was on Prozac and now everybody's on Xanax because it seems like they're more anxious than depressed these days. So I'm excited to talk about this material with you, because what I've seen is that using natural medicines and the naturopathic approach is really probably, in my opinion, and of course I'm biased, is probably the best way to really treat the underlying causes of mental illness, especially anxiety and depression. So that's what we're going to talk about. And this little picture here on the side is just a little reminder that as part of being mentally healthy, it's important to do all the things that make you happy. And in my last life, before I went to medical school, I was a drummer in a band for a number of years, and it's something that still makes me happy, and I love doing and recording and things like that. Okay, so when we talk about uh, psychiatry, usually regular conventional psychiatrists think about neurotransmitters. And if somebody comes in with depression, they often will get a drug that raises artificially neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, or even for anxiety, the same thing. You get drugs that change neurotransmitters. And so most of the research on these conditions are about neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are the molecules in the brain that help with basically how you feel, you know, whether you're happy, whether you're sad, whether you're calm, whether you're anxious. But I think the focus on neurotransmitters is a big mistake, and I think that's one of the reasons why, like for example, for depression, really the literature suggests that antidepressants don't work more than 30–35% of the time, which is not much more than a placebo or a sugar pill works for those conditions. And the reason is because there's a lot more going on than just neurotransmitters. So when I work with a patient and they come in for anxiety or depression, I think about a whole lot of things. So and what this slide shows you is that there's a lot of other issues going on. And I want to thank my 9-year-old for her crayons and letting me borrow them so I could do the slide. So, you know, because I like to look at a person's genetics. I want to look at the foods they're eating. I want to look at how inflamed their body is. A lot of times mental health is just an inflamed brain. I want to look at their blood sugar and how balanced it is. Of course, what's stressing them out, because when you're stressed out, it kind of burns out the stress system, and you can get very anxious and very depressed. I want to look at digestion. I want to look at sleep. If they're exercising, exercise alone can be a very, very potent way to deal with anxiety and depression. I want to look at their community, you know, what's their support system. A term called epigenetics, which is how our environment and how our food and what we do will affect what genes get turned on and get turned off. So that's an important piece. Looking at a person's hormones, looking at their nutrient levels, if they don't have enough nutrients in their body and they don't have the cofactors that they need to make the neurotransmitters, things like that. Toxicity, if there's a lot of heavy metals in their system, if there's a lot of plastics in their system, maybe they had other drugs for many years that cause toxicity, and something called mitochondrial function, which is looking at the energy packs of a person's body, because sometimes when they're low, then our mental health doesn't work because the nervous system won't work so well. So, so if you don't remember anything else from my lecture, I would say remember this slide. Because what this slide shows us is that there's a lot of things that affect a lot of things. It's like a web. If you touch one part of it, the rest of it's going to move. So when we think about mental health and neurotransmitters, we have to think that there are a lot of things that really are part of why a particular person has anxiety, and they could be very different for everybody. So as a naturopathic doctor, we're taught to look at all of these things together and decide for each patient, well, what are the things that probably they need the most work on so that they can get back in balance and their stress system and their brain can get back in line and feel good and feel the way they're supposed to feel. I talk about in my book, this is my latest book, Put Anxiety Behind You, and I have a drawing I made of a stool. And when I think about thoughts and when I think about mood, you know, psychotherapy is certainly a big part of what can change thoughts, but I also think about the thoughts as being supported by a few legs of the stool. And these legs can be a number of things: supplements, food, sleep, exercise, hormones. So again, everything we just talked about. And what I've learned is when you support people in different ways at the same time, then the thoughts can change and can be better. And that's without even touching neurotransmitters directly, right? So when I work with a patient, I wanted to just take you through naturopathically what I think about for a patient. So the first thing I like to think about is intake. You know, what I want to, when I meet the patient for the first visit, and this is where I think naturopathic medicine really shines, you know, because we learn in school that it's so important to make a great connection with each patient. You know, the theologian Paul Tillich said the first duty of love is to listen. And that's really where the healing takes place. When we listen to a patient, we really get to know them. I'll have so many patients that'll leave saying, wow, you know, I've never told all this to one person, or you're the only person who really has the whole picture. And I think that's vital, because there's no way we can help a person heal if we don't have the whole picture. So I think about drugs. So are drugs a good thing? Are drugs not a good thing? Well, it depends on the patient. You know, this just came out a couple of weeks ago. They learned that Frank Sinatra. I like getting Frank Sinatra into any PowerPoint and presentation I can. So so I apologize. But so this was sad to me when I saw this. Frank Sinatra's manager says antidepressant was to blame for his failing health. So Frank Sinatra was taking Elavil, which is a tricyclic antidepressant, for many years. He was probably taking too much, and the accounts from his band members and from his manager suggest that really the reason for his decline was because he was kind of, I guess, addicted to this drug that he thought he needed, and it unfortunately didn't allow him to be healthy anymore. And that's sad. You know, I saw Frank Sinatra once or twice when I was younger, and he was so amazing. And it's just sad to see people who could otherwise, in my opinion, be treated. And he didn't have very severe depression, but he kind of got hooked onto this, and that was part of his demise. And I think that's a problem in conventional medical care. Now, it's not to say that medications aren't appropriate. Sometimes, you know, when you have a patient who's suicidal and they can't take care of themselves and they can't take care of their family, and they're even in a dangerous situation to themselves or somebody else, then that occasionally a medication can be life-saving. So I don't want you to leave here thinking I think all medications are bad. No, I think when they're properly used, they can be life-saving. But unfortunately, in the case of anxiety and depression, the vast majority of prescriptions, the millions and millions being used, in my opinion, don't need to be used, and there's a lot of other options. And that they should be reserved only for those really urgent care situations where you need something that heavy duty. As you can see, for anxiety and depression, there's a whole list of drugs, and we're not going to go through them. But the point is that, you know, when there's so many drugs for a condition, it makes you wonder if any of them are really working well. I mean, I find in general, you know, the research suggests that depression medications work about 30 to 35% of the time, which isn't that great. And even when they work, within 1 to 2 years, they end up not working so well. Anti-anxiety medications work very, very well, the ones you see in red there, especially the anxiolytics. But the problem with those is that they're very addictive, and you have to take more and more to get the same effect. So you go to heavier and heavier drugs, and you get to the point where at some point you can't go any heavier, and they stop working, and now you have a person who's very toxic from the drugs, and they're still anxious, and now they have to do something. And I see many of those patients in my office, and I think that could have been avoided if the underlying causes were looked at from the very beginning. This cartoon says, I've tried all the different antidepressants. The only one that seems to work is money. And you know, and that's not completely untrue, because I think, at least working in Manhattan and New York City area, people work so much because things are so expensive that they don't have the time to take care of themselves. And when they're not taking care of themselves, that's when their health seems to be an issue. You know, because people know they need to take care of themselves, but oftentimes they don't, because they're just so worried about money. So there is some truth to this, you know. Most comedy has truth in it, and I think this is true. And sometimes, you know, when I work with patients, the first thing to think about is, well, how can we get some of the money stress off them? You know, maybe they need to see a financial counselor while they're working with me at the same time, because, you know, they know what they need to do, but they don't feel they have the time because they have to work so much. So I think it's an important piece for a lot of people. So the third thing that I think about, you know, when moving through working with patients is, what laboratory tests do I want to look at? Even in conventional psychiatry today, usually there aren't a lot of laboratory tests that doctors look at, because it's a brain issue. It has nothing to do with the body. It's a mind issue. And the truth is, the brain has all to do with what goes on in the body. So typically I run a lot of different lab tests. And unfortunately with this webinar, there's no time to go through them all. But I wanted to talk about them briefly. So there are a lot of lab tests. So I usually look at a lot of blood work. I look at adrenal function tests. So the adrenal glands sit at the top of the kidneys and are part of the stress system. And there's ways to test them to see if they're working really too much, or they're not working enough, or they're just sort of burnt out. I look at a lot of hormonal tests as well, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all these things that play a role in how our brain and the receptors in our brain works with the neurotransmitters. Toxicity panels to see if people have exposures to different heavy metals and things that could be an issue. Mold. Mold can also play a strong role in why some people have mental health concerns, because mold, when it's in your environment, it holds on to a lot of toxins that you will inhale and will get into your bloodstream and end up in your brain. In fact, there's even an article called Inhalational Alzheimer's that came out about 2 years ago by a fellow named Bredesen, which talks about how mold can even contribute to things like Alzheimer's disease. I look at mitochondrial testing. There's different blood tests that can look at how the energy packs, the mitochondria and your cells are working. And those energy packs are really important for the nervous system. And then digestive function. So digestion is such a key for how the brain works. The digestive tract is called the second brain. In fact, most of the neurotransmitters that your brain uses are made in the digestive tract. So there are tests to look at that as well to see if that's not working well. This is from the movie Ocean's 11, and Matt Damon asked Brad Pitt, after Brad Pitt explained some crazy scheme that he's working on, Matt Damon says, "Are you suicidal?" And Brad Pitt says, "Only in the morning." And, and it's interesting because, and I know this, I'm making light of it, but it's a very serious situation. A lot of people who are depressed and are suicidal, they feel worse in the morning. And I've seen patients like this. This patient on the left, that's not her real name. We'll call her Raj. She's 58 years old. If you look at her cortisol, which is the yellow line at the bottom, very, very low in the morning. And then it actually pops up kind of high at night because the green to red here is the normal range. So what we find is her cortisol is very low in the morning, very high at night. She feels awful in the morning, near suicidal, and to the point where at night she's up, she feels her best, and to the point where she can't go to sleep, and then she doesn't sleep well. So this is an adrenal stress test that looks at cortisol levels. So this is one of a number of tests we like to look at, and this is another patient with a similar pattern, really high at night and really terrible anxiety along with insomnia. So looking at tests like this, which really conventional doctors don't do, is really a helpful way to understand how the stress system is working. As an example, this is just some blood work that I was working on with a patient who had a lot of chronic fatigue, and he was diagnosed as depressed, but he didn't think he was depressed, and we learned that certain things were off for him. Most notably, he had a very high iron. His lactic acid, which is a sign that the mitochondria, the energy packs in the cells aren't working very well. His iodine was low, so maybe his thyroid might have been a little sluggish, although his thyroid hormone was okay. So, we look at different things and with different patients depending on their symptoms. And so testing can be a very helpful part of figuring out how to help somebody. I also do genetic testing and look at different genes that can play a role with how the body makes neurotransmitters and what they call the catecholamines, which are the stress hormones. And it also suggests maybe how we handle certain vitamins well or not as well. So I like to look at genetic tests. There's different ways to look at genetic tests. 23andMe is one of them. There are a few, and then I have patients give me the raw data, and I'll take a look at that in detail, and I'll try to look at it in the context of what their conditions are. And then there's epigenetics, which I mentioned earlier, which is the idea that we have certain genes, but there are ways that we can use food and environment to affect which genes get turned on and get turned off. For example, green tea is a brilliant way to help genes methylate property, which is meaning that we can hook on certain molecules on the genes so that they get turned on and get turned off properly. And green tea and green vegetables, basically anything green, is a good way to do that. And the ways to look at epigenetics, there's different forms of how these genes get affected, and there's methylation and acetylation, microRNA, and transcription factors, and that would be a lecture in and of itself. But basically the idea is, and the second picture here is of a reel-to-reel recorder, and basically there's ways to open up the genes so that you can read it, which is like almost the way that this reel-to-reel opens up the tape so that it can be played and you can hear the music. And foods and lifestyle and stressors and meditation and all these things can be a part of what genes get opened up and can be read, and what genes get tightened up and don't be read, because you want genes that promote disease to be closed up, and you want genes that promote health to be opened up. And generally, using epigenetic things like healthy foods are a way to do that. So, in mental health, there's a lot of good research about using epigenetic mechanisms to affect a better brain and better health overall. So now I wanted to talk about the recommendations, the things I talk about in my books. You know, when the rubber hits the road, what really helps people. So overall, it's sleep, working on stress, working on food, digestion, blood sugar, inflammation, exercise, naturopathic hydrotherapy, getting into nature, detoxifying people, and getting the right supplements. So that's my plan as a general rule. When I work with people, those are all the things I think about. And then when I talk to them and I learn more about them, then I get a good idea of which ones I should use for them in particular. Sleep is critical. You know, the two things I think about, if people aren't sleeping well and if they're not pooping well, I don't even actually work on anything else. The first thing I want to do is help people sleep and help them poop, because if you get your digestion moving and you get your sleep going, a lot of things will generally get better. Sleep helps your brain detox. It helps your energy packs revitalize, and so you feel better. There's a lot of ways to work on sleep. There's supplements. There's sleep rituals. Melatonin is a natural way for people who have trouble falling and staying asleep. So which ones to use is really going to depend on the person. Valerian is an herb that's the most studied herb for sleep of all time. Working on people's stress. Of course, stress is going to play a role in sleep. You know, when people are very, very stressed out in their life, you know, when we used to study anxiety and depression, we used to stress out animals in different ways when I was working at the National Institutes of Health. And they would react like people. They would get to the point where they couldn't take it anymore, and they would kind of give up. And that's what the animals do, and that's what the humans do. So understanding, like, what is it that's overwhelming people, and how can we make changes in their life to maybe make it less overwhelming, or how can we make changes in how they're thinking to help them process it differently so it doesn't stress their physical body out and create anxiety and depression. Meditation is probably the most elegant way to help people to help people's stress system relax. It really balances the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the system of the brain and the glands in the body that create the stress hormones. So if anyone out there hasn't tried meditation, I strongly recommend it. It's just a brilliant way to change your physiology to be more healthy. So working on food and digestion and blood sugar. If I had to pick one diet, I'd probably pick the Mediterranean diet if I didn't know the person. The Mediterranean diet has been proven to lower inflammation, proven to stop development of anxiety and depression. It also helps the blood vessels. It also makes molecules that help the brain work better. It's a great way to eat. I mean, my family's from Sicily, so I feel like I kind of grew up with a lot of the Mediterranean diet, so I'm lucky that way. But it's really something anyone can implement of any culture, and there's many versions of it. You know, I know there's a lot of diets out there, and some of them work and some of them don't, and some of them work for some people. If I don't know a person and I had to recommend a general diet, I'd start with the Mediterranean diet and then maybe specialize from there. Working on a patient's gut means working on their flora and their good bugs and their digestive system, because the brain is affected by the gut and the gut's affected by the brain. The digestive tract makes molecules that will talk to the brain and change behavior, and those changes in behavior will affect how we eat and how even the gut functions. So that's what this picture is showing, that there's this bidirectional relationship between the digestive tract, which is the lining here of the digestive tract, and the brain itself. So exercise, you know, our bodies are made to move. We need to exercise. This one fellow who's an expert in ADHD said exercise is like taking a bit of Ritalin or an amphetamine. It's like taking a stimulant, meaning that he found that the effects you could get on ADHD alone are just as good as the drugs. Exercise is brilliant for anxiety and depression. Me having had a fair amount of anxiety, I'm in my late, I'll be 50. When I was in my 20s, I had a lot of anxiety, and I find even to this day, exercise is a brilliant way to make sure that it never comes back. So exercise, if you're not doing it, that's another thing. And of course, you have to do it to your ability. So some people, if you're just starting out, you go easy so you don't hurt anything, and you work with somebody who can help you with that. This is one of my favorite cartoons. I thought they said rum. So anyway, I think it's funny. All right, next one. So a little bit about hydrotherapy in nature. So as a naturopathic doctor, we learn about water therapy. Hot water brings blood to an area. Cool water brings blood away. And it's a really wonderful way to change your physiology as well. And it's been shown that when you bring cold to your body, cold water, you can lower brain inflammation, you can activate epinephrine and beta endorphins, which help you feel really, really good. You know, so maybe the people in the Polar Bear Club have something, you know, and maybe that's the reason why they do it. And when you ask those people, they'll tell you, yeah, I feel great. But I do find when people do warm showers and alternate with cold showers, it can help them feel better and gives them pep, you know. So it's a really nice natural way to work with the body. So one article suggests starting with a warm shower, 5 minutes, cooling down to a sustained 2 to 3 minute period of 68 degrees. So that's one way to try it. So basically, you just put it on hot, and you turn it down to cold little by little, and you take a cool shower as long as you can, and then you get out of the shower and see how that feels. So that's actually my shower head. If you notice, I have a little chlorine filter on the shower head, because chlorine, when it's in the water, it will vaporize and get into your, and you'll inhale it, and it's not good for your bloodstream and your cardiovascular system. So, so if you have a shower, get a chlorine filter on there. Getting into nature, there's a lot of Japanese studies about getting into nature and showing the benefits. There's these phytonicids, which are molecules which you breathe in and help your body feel calmer. And they've done studies where they bring patients into the forest and they measure their blood for stress hormones before and after, and inflammatory markers before and after. And they find both can go down very significantly just by being exposed to nature and being exposed to trees. And of course, when you get into nature, you get sunshine, and you get sunshine allows you to make vitamin D. And vitamin D is very important for staving off depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disease. Probably one of the best studies on vitamin D was done by John Denver, who did a research paper that said that sunshine on my shoulders does indeed make him happy. So I think that's a really good research study. You should check that one out. So detoxification, really quickly. Basically, there's a lot of chemicals around us, and chemicals can get into our fat tissue, and which surrounds our nervous system, and really change how our nervous systems work. So if people are predisposed to anxiety and depression, sometimes these toxins will play a very strong role in bringing us to feeling that way. So we like to look at metals, plastics, mold, food dyes, you know, things that are in foods, pesticides, off-gassing from new furniture and carpets, and all of these things are toxins our bodies can't metabolize. And this can affect our brain and our nervous system. So as a naturopathic doctor, I think it's really important to work on that. So lastly is supplements. And I know we're going through things fast, so this is an overview, so I apologize. So when I think about supplements, the first thing I think about is if you take too many supplements, you're going to look like this guy on the right here. So you just want to take the right supplements for you. Generally, I like to start people on a multiple, an essential fatty acid, and a probiotic. If I didn't know you and I didn't know anything about you, and you said, well, what should I take? I would say, well, at least start with a multiple, an essential fatty acid, and a probiotic, because that generally makes the most sense. And unless you're allergic to fish or something, it shouldn't get you into trouble. And it's a good way to support the cofactors you need, and to support your membranes with the fish oil, and also to support your digestive tract with the good probiotics. So today, there's so many supplements we could talk about. I was just pulling out a few favorites beyond those that I find are really useful. So, for example, fish oil has been shown to be very helpful to get antidepressants to work their best. So you have a patient who's treatment resistant, which means they're on these antidepressants. It's not working so well. What do? Well, there's actually a lot of research, and I wrote a couple of papers, which you can find on my website, that talk about different nutrients and natural supplements that can really help antidepressants work better. Fish oil is one of them, B12 is one of them, creatine is another one, vitamin D is another one. So there's a few of them. But the first one I would start with was fish oil, and this is a graphic from my book. What it shows is that when you get good, healthy fish oils in, you create membranes that are nice and fluid, which means toxins will get out properly, nutrients will get in, and inflammation goes down. Versus when you eat a lot of saturated fats, especially from things like meat and trans fat and fried foods, you make very rigid cell membranes, and rigid cell membranes don't work so well. And they won't allow things in and out, which allows you to be sick easier. And if you're predisposed to anxiety and depression, your nervous system won't work as well. Curcumin is another beautiful herb. It helps induce glutathione, which is the powerful antioxidant your liver uses to help clean your body out. It helps lower inflammation in the body. And they've studied it in people with major depression. They've also studied it in people with anxiety, which I talk about in my book as well. And they've even seen that combinations, here's one study here, and what they showed was that the combination of the drug and the curcumin worked better, but the drug, fluoxetine, which is Prozac, actually worked not much better than curcumin itself. So what we're learning here is that curcumin can be as powerful an antidepressant as the drugs. So it's, so if it's less toxic and it can work as well, then why not start with that, unless there's some urgent care reason. So saffron is a beautiful herb as well. There's meta-analysis, which means a few studies that were put together, and what they found is that it, again, has a very good antidepressant effect. So, so another one to try is saffron. It's really good for the stomach, and the digestive tract, which is one of the reasons it works. Saffron is also has been studied for people who are on antidepressants and are having sexual side effects. Sometimes I'll have men who come in and they'll say, hey, I don't want to touch their drug. It's working great, but I don't like the fact that my libido is so low. Things aren't working so well down there. And so we'll use things like saffron. Sometimes we'll use a little ginkgo. And it's been shown, the saffron's been shown in both men and women to help improve sexual function too. So that's a picture, if anyone can guess, that's a picture of Marvin Gaye, who wrote and sang Sexual Healing, of course. So that's why he's there. So thank you, Marvin. And I also use a few other things: chromium for blood sugar regulation, rhodiola to balance the stress system, curcumin we mentioned, berberines, which also can help the brain function better and the gut function better, and the saffron. And actually, I formulated a supplement that puts those all together, and I work with people using that as kind of a base formula along with the probiotic and the fish oil and the multiple vitamin, and I find that's very, very helpful. to help people just kind of get online. Of course, if we're not working on sleep and diet and all the other things, I don't think supplements by themselves can always get the job done. But when you do everything together, even better. And then to help people's neurotransmitters, Sammy there's only two things that have been shown that are, even the American Psychiatric Association says works for depression. Sammy is one of them, and there's a lot of good studies on Sammy that suggests how well it works, at least as well as the antidepressants. 5-HTP, which is an amino acid that gets made into serotonin, which was very well studied before Prozac came out. And since Prozac came out in the 90s, really people didn't study it so much anymore, which is a shame. It also helps make a melatonin as well as serotonin, so that can be helpful for sleep. It's very good as an anti-anxiety. And actually 5-HTP has also been shown to be a good way to lower food cravings in people who want to lose weight. So, which the antidepressants actually do the exact opposite, right? So I also did a formula for these where I give people tyrosine to support epinephrine and norepinephrine, and Mucuna to support their dopamine, Sammy, which raises all the neurotransmitters a little bit, 5-HTP for serotonin, and a Chinese herb called apocyanum venetum. And I use that formula for people who don't, who prefer not to take tricyclic antidepressants and other types of antidepressants, but need a little something to help them feel better. So I find that combination can work really well as well, too. So, and that's a picture of Mucuna, which is an Ayurvedic herb, which actually has a little bit of dopamine in it. For anti-anxiety, I like using passion flower. It's a brilliant herb. It's even been studied in outpatients before surgery as being a really good way to reduce anxiety without inducing sedation. And I know a lot of doctors don't want to have patients taking herbs right before they go under, any kind of surgery because they're worried about what it's going to do in the body. But at least this study suggests that it's not a problem. And this was from 2008. So just interesting, but I find passion flower is something I took myself for a while. It's a very beautiful, calming herb. It helps kind of reduce the thinking, overthinking of things that go on, especially at night when you're trying to sleep. So it's a beautiful herb to try. I use lithium orotate, which is a mineral, which is very, very calming. It's not the drug lithium, which is lithium carbamate, which is a much higher dose kind of toxic drug. This is lithium orotate, very, very low dose. In fact, its high lithium levels in the water have been shown to have much lower rates of things like suicide and depression in the areas where it's found. This picture is a tarragon, actually, from my garden. Thyme from my garden, which I have patients sometimes infuse in olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, organic, and they leave it there for about a month, and then you can take like a teaspoon a day and you'll get a few micrograms of lithium as well. Or there's supplements that you could take in higher doses, and I see it work really well, and it's generally quite safe, even for younger teens and kids in small doses. It's quite good, and it can help people feel better and much calmer. So that's a new favorite of mine. And then hypericum, which is St. John's wort. So that's the other one that's been even shown by the American Psychiatric Association as being beneficial and works for depression. And this study here is the latest study of studies, right? A meta-analysis looks at a bunch of studies. And what they found was looking from 1966 to 2015, over 3,000 patients, what they found was that St. John's wort, if you read the conclusion here, both St. John's wort and the SSRIs, so the antidepressant drugs, are effective in mild to moderate depression, but St. John's wort extract is safer than the SSRIs. So again, if there's something that works just as well and is actually safer, why wouldn't we start with that? That makes total sense to me. You do have to be a little careful with St. John's wort. So these are my nephews. This is Jonathan, and these are the twins, right? Jake and Nick. And this is Nick, this is Jake. And my sister-in-law, unbeknownst to us, when she was taking birth control pills, decided to try St. John's wort. And the twins were born as a result of that, on birth control pills. So that tells you, even though herbs are natural, and these things we're talking about are natural, you have to know what you're working with, because they can still contribute to side effects and change how other medications, and in this case birth control, works. So you really do want to know about how these things work, and you want to be well trained in them. And that's why I love naturopathic medicine and naturopathic school, because we really learn these things at a very in-depth level, and we are the experts in drug, nutrient, and herb interactions. And just a little bit, I wanted to talk about weaning off medication. So when a patient's done all the naturopathic things, and we worked on things, sleep and diet and exercise and digestion and all the things we discussed, then when they're feeling better and it's time, I'll usually talk to them, and they'll talk to their prescribing doctor, and so this way we have a team approach, everybody's on board, and we'll talk about weaning off medications. And so, example, this book I have, How Come They're Happy and I'm Not, I talk about the antidepressants and which supplements I use to wean off them as well. As an example, in my anxiety book, I do the same thing with anxiety medications too, because I find that natural medicines can be a very good support in helping people get off medications, because to tell you the truth, it's hard to get off these drugs. You know, even for someone who never had a mood issue, if you take it long enough, your body gets used to it, your brain gets used to it, and when you get off it, it's not so easy. And if you get off too fast, anyone will have side effects, and sometimes, unfortunately, doctors will say to them, well, that means you need to stay on the medication. And what I've learned is that's not necessarily true. It just means you need to go slower, and you need a lot more support so your body can catch up and start making the things that it relied on the medication for. So these are just some charts that I put in my books for this stuff. So to put this all together, you know, we talked about that it's important to get to know a patient really well, to decide whether drugs are really necessary and you know, for certain urgent care needs, that we need to run laboratory tests to understand the body physiology as much as possible, and then to give people all the proper recommendations: sleep, stress support, food digestion, inflammatory support, exercise, get out into nature, possibly hydrotherapy, possibly detoxification, and the right supplements. And I find this is a very solid plan. When you look at all these things together, you really, it's, you know, hopefully no stone is unturned, and we can really help the person get back to their vitality, get back to who they're supposed to be, you know, which is what this is all about. So they can go out and live the life they want to live and do the things they love to do. So what did Hippocrates do? Many, many years ago, he was considered the first physician. Well, he gave, when people had mental illness, he gave them healthy food. He made sure they got sunlight. He made sure they got exercise. He made sure they did hydrotherapy, water therapy, and he gave them the right herbs and supplementation. So in a way, I'm not really recommending much more than Hippocrates himself did years ago. I mean, maybe I have a few more specifics, but I really haven't improved on what Hippocrates was doing a long time ago. So I thank Hippocrates for starting that paradigm, and I'm glad naturopathic medicine is carrying it forward and keeping it alive to this day, especially when I think the conventional system kind of lost sight of this. So I just wanted to read to you, I got this a little while ago from someone who picked up one of my books, and she said, I just wanted to thank you personally for How Come They're Happy and I'm Not. I found it by accident in my public library during a 4th-month spell of being too depressed to get out of bed every other day. And your book saved my life. I hadn't realized that what I'm going through is abnormal. Following your advice completely turned my life around. I feel a lot better than I did 6 months ago. Whenever I realize I'm stuck in a rut, I reread your book and pull myself out of it. Now, this isn't to praise my book or to praise me. Everything I learned in naturopathic school. I got to naturopathic school. I didn't know about any of this. Okay, so the whole idea, the paradigm, working on all these different things in combination, this is what my teachers taught me. And so now I'm just writing it in a book for this particular condition, and I'm hopefully teaching other people, right? The word doctor comes from the word docere, which means teacher. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to teach our patients. And so when I read something like this, first of all, I'm thrilled because that's the whole point of this, to actually help people feel better. And secondly, I'm always in awe of the naturopathic paradigm and naturopathic medicine, because I'm thankful to all my teachers who taught me this paradigm that I can bring to my patients every day. So it's just it's just a beautiful thing, and I couldn't think about doing anything else, you know. So so I'm glad you guys are here. I'm glad you guys are listening. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank
Oh,
you.
please also join me on Facebook and on Twitter as well. Please stay in touch.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Bongiorno, for the wonderful and super jam-packed presentation. I don't think you possibly could have fit more in the hour here. So I really do appreciate it. Before we go on, I just wanted to tell folks, I don't know if you can go to the next slide on the webinars, but just tell folks we've got 2 upcoming webinars in January and February on career changers for those of you thinking about new careers. We have a webinar on January 10th, and then we're talking more about inflammation, and except this way, how inflammation impacts our heart. And so we'll be talking about heart health, salt, sugar, plastics, and fats, and the things that impact our metabolism and hurt our heart. And that's with Dr. Fraser Smith, who is the AANMC board president and dean of naturopathic medicine over at the National University of Health Science in Lombard, Illinois. So super excited about both of those. And with that, the next slide just has our contact information. So for those of you at the end of this who have some additional questions, please email us at info@aanmc.org, and we also have an 800 number for those of you calling from North America. So thank you so very much. And with that, I will shoot. We've got a bunch of questions here, Peter, so I'm going to try if we can keep our answers short so we can get through as many as possible. So the first one was if you had resources on mold and mitochondrial testing, and then there were a couple other questions just in regards to the testing that you discussed and insurance coverage.
Sure. Well, so in terms of mold and mitochondrial testing, there are a few, there's a few different ways to look at it. There's some blood work that looks at markers to see if they're certain, they're higher or not. There's a fellow named Shoemaker who was a medical doctor who actually pioneered a lot of the thought about how to work on mitochondrial testing, and I'm blanking on the if you look up Shoemaker and mold, you'll find his website, and there's a lot of good resources there. There's also a laboratory called Great Plains Laboratory who does a lot of mold testing too, and that seems to be very helpful. Mitochondrial testing. You know, I think that's still up and coming. I use mostly blood work for that because I haven't found any perfect tests for it yet. There are a couple companies that actually talked to me about their mitochondrial testing. I'm learning more about those, so I hope to have more information in a couple of months about other ways to look at the mitochondria. Honestly, and I didn't put the slide in there, one way to look at the mitochondria is just really take a good history and listen to the symptoms. You know, people are really sensitive if they're tired a lot, if you know, if they're having issues with skin. There's a whole bunch of things. So that's usually what I use, the blood tests and those kind of things. In terms of insurance, insurance is going to depend on your particular insurance plan and the doctor you see, whether you'll be covered. So that's very individual.
Thank you. And so there are a number of questions here. One about diet, and if you can talk, I know we get a lot of questions about, you know, veganism, plant-based diets, and if that's appropriate, just because you spoke of the Mediterranean diet, but vegan and vegetarian diets are ill-advised for folks with anxiety and depression.
Sure, and so the answer is, you know, and I talk about, I'm going to go back a slide or two, if I can. I talk about this in my book, especially the Put Anxiety Behind You book. There's a number of different diets, and they're all good for some people, and they're all not good for some people. The fact of the matter is everyone's body is different, and one person's food is another man's poison, right? So, so working with a naturopathic doctor is really a good way to figure out which diet is good for you. I am not religious about any diet. Like I said, if I don't know someone, I'll pick the Mediterranean diet, but I would say, you know, it's important to work with someone because, you know, if you look at the studies, let's say on cardiovascular disease, some people do great on a lot of protein and meat, and low carb, some people, that's a disaster for them, and they need more complex carbs and a lot of oils and no meat. So, and the reason is because everybody's a little bit different. So, so I look at the Mediterranean diet, I look at the blood type diet, and I try to figure out what's going to really work best for each individual. And that's what my books talk about as well. I think when you get religious about one particular plan is, oh, this is the way, I need to be paleo, or I need to be vegan, or then somehow it's going to end up being a problem. So.
Thank you. Let's see. There was a question about supplements in breastfeeding, and I know that there are a number of websites available for that. Do you have a favorite so that folks who are pregnant or breastfeeding have access to what's safe during that time? I know you mentioned your beautiful cousins.
Yeah, like those are my nephews. Yeah.
Oh, nephews, I'm sorry.
Safe for breastfeeding. Actually, I can't think of one resource for that. I know my wife. My wife is also a naturopathic doc and acupuncturist. She does a lot of work with breastfeeding. So I would have to ask her, honestly. But if you, yeah, I'd be happy to get back to you on that. I can't think of one resource though. I mean, generally, anything that's safe in pregnancy, I will consider safe in breastfeeding. And that's the thing. And when a woman's breastfeeding, I'm very conservative with the things I give her, because most things that she eats will get into the breast milk too. So there are, like certain things like magnesium are typically very safe. Certainly foods in general are the way to go. And if a woman has anxiety and depression and she's breastfeeding, I'll usually work more with things like acupuncture, massage, and just a limited select herbs and things that I know are completely safe during pregnancy.
Dr. Bongiorno, can you talk a little bit about EFAs? There were a number of questions on fatty acids, and as well as if somebody, kind of the 3-to-6 ratio, and if someone's has a pretty poor diet, will that actually push oxidation? And so there were a number of questions around that.
Right. Well, my first answer is, if someone has a pretty poor diet, it's going to, anything that you have a tendency to go wrong in your body, it'll push that, right? Stress pushes that, and not eating well pushes that, as well as not sleeping enough. So in general, yeah, a poor diet's going to push whatever would go wrong with a bad diet, right? So as far as essential fatty acids go, I mean, there are blood tests where you can look at the ratios, if that's something that's needed. Generally, I recommend people eat fish and try to, preferably mercury free, low mercury fish, that kind of thing. And the other thing that's really helpful is taking the right fish oils as well. Because when you get in good essential fatty acids, you put your body in a place where the inflammatory pathways are not exaggerated. So when we don't eat good fish and we eat a poor diet, then typically our inflammation pathways become much more exaggerated, so that when there's a problem in our body, it gets a lot more inflamed. And fish oil is a really beautiful way to temper that. Now, fish oil isn't something you take it and the next day your joints feel better. It's really a long-term commitment. It's something, that people have to take for months, I think, to start seeing a good effect with just fish oil. But I think it's a profound effect, and when it happens, it sticks. So it's definitely worth focusing on.
Can you speak a little bit about detoxification and in general, colonics, enemas, and things that you use to help the body detox during this process?
Right. So the first step to detox is getting rid of the things that you're trying to not have in the body. So in other words, if people are drinking out of soda cans and there's aluminum, or they're eating mercury-laden fish, or there's a lot of mold around them. So you have to work on where it's coming from and getting rid of it. That's the first step to detox, right? The second step to detox is foods, and sleep, because when your sleep is when your body and your brain detoxes. Drinking plenty of water. Your body can't detox without water. And then eating plenty of vegetables and the right foods for you to help your body really clean out. So that's the second stage of detox. The third stage, I would say, would be using supplements that support your liver to detoxify using the pathways it knows how to do. And there are certain nutrients and things that we use in our practice that are very helpful for what they call phase 1 and phase 2 of liver detoxification. So bringing those things in would be a third phase. And the fourth phase would be using other kind of what I would consider higher force interventions to help the body detox. Colonics can be one of them. And they could be wonderful, where you're actually bringing water into the colon and allowing it to flush out. Because when you clean out the colon, it sends a signal to your liver that it can do more detoxification. So if you have everyone taking the right nutrients and foods, and you do the colonics, it'll help it clean out even better. And then lastly, is doing things like what they call chelation, where you actually put some molecules into the bloodstream that helps pull some of the metals and toxins out of the tissues. And that I'll reserve for people who either they're not getting better or they have such a strong toxicity picture and they're very, very sick with, whatever neurological disease or something, and you want to go a little faster. And sometimes those things are good. But you have to be careful with those because those can tax the kidneys, they can tax the liver too. So I like to start with the most gentle steps and then move up from there depending on the particular patient. I hope that made sense. That was like a kind of a whirlwind detoxification class, right?
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit to just how you choose a good probiotic? I know you mentioned that was one of the staples.
Right. Well, in general, if I don't know a person, I mean, the right one is going to be the strains that are right for them. If I don't know someone and they want to take a probiotic, I would just start them with a regular Lactobacillus bifidus. Maybe like 4 billion, something like that, which is pretty low dose, just a general one. There are many of them. Really the best way to increase the probiotics in your body is to eat foods with a lot of fiber, because that's what they live off of, and the good probiotics will grow when they get all that good fiber. So eating the right foods is very important. I use a product called Restoraflora. I mean, there's so many out there that are very good. And there are some that are not so good. So you have to make sure the one you use is a good quality company, because probiotics, if you don't make them properly, you actually can grow bacteria that's not so good for you. But I usually start people with the Lactobacillus bifidus, and then depending if they have other issues, then there might be other strains that would be good for them. Like if they have pancreatitis, plantarum can be very good. If they have an infection called C. difficile, then Saccharomyces might be good. And there's other ones out there too for different things. I mean, there's still a lot of research going on, so there's a lot we don't know about this. So that's why usually the basics I feel most comfortable with.
Wonderful. I know we're almost at time here. Just maybe one or two more. So there's a question here about anxiety and paranoia and how you work with maybe some more serious mental illnesses and how you work as a team member with psychiatrists and
Sure.
and
Well, with serious mental illnesses, especially when there's a situation when someone might hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, you definitely need a full team approach. And like I said, sometimes drugs need to be a part of that too, especially if they, because like for me, we're talking about going out and buying fish and eating kale, and that's all beautiful, but if someone is thinking about hurting themselves and they're in that place, they're probably not going to be going to the supermarket and buying some nice fish and cooking it, So that's why you have to use the right medicine for the right person. And working with a psychiatrist is very, very valuable, because if that person isn't stable, they're not going to be able to do the things that I need them to do. Even with supplements, for example, it's like a lot of these supplements you need to take twice a day, 3 times a day. And if someone isn't stable, they're not going to be able to do those things, let alone get to sleep on time and do their meditation or whatever it is that they need to do to, in the long term, actually heal. But as far as the difficult diseases, like I've seen patients here with schizophrenia, and I've worked closely with their psychiatrists. And what I've seen is when you implement these naturopathic paradigms and strategies, you can help people not only feel better and get healthier, but they can lower the doses sometimes of things like risperidol and these nasty, medications, which, admittedly are helping them feel better and stabilize. And the nice thing is, if you can get people to lower their dosage and still be stable and feel good, then they'll have a much longer, more longevity, because these medications at higher doses can be very toxic to the mitochondria and to the nervous system and cause other problems. And so people can't take them especially at higher doses for long periods of time. So if you can get them at the lowest dose possible using naturopathic medicines, then you're ensuring that they'll feel good and not need these higher doses, which can cause more problems. And occasionally, even people may not need them, which is amazing. So it's, so working with a psychiatrist is very important, because you want to coordinate that care and make sure that everyone's on the same team and working towards the same goal, and inspiring that patient to do the things that need to get done in spite of how they're feeling.
Thank you. I know we're just about out of time. There's a question: are you taking new patients? And I know there have been a number of questions about the supplements that you've formulated and things, and so I'm sending folks to your website for that. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and they can contact us through the website. Certainly. Thank you.
Okay. And then I know, gosh, I'm trying to get through all these questions here. There was one question about epigenetics and things like type 1 diabetes and how that interplays.
Epigenetics and type. Is there any more specifics about that question?
Not so much. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes, right? How you eat affects how genes get turned on. Now, type 1 diabetes seems to be a little more of a genetic factor, but, what I've seen in early type 1 diabetes, a lot of times it's actually an inflammatory issue of the pancreas. And there's actually a lot you can do to support that. So the first thing I like to figure out in type 1 diabetes is whether someone's still making their own insulin. And there is something to look at called C-peptide in the blood that tells you if they're making their own insulin. And if they are, then there's a lot you can still do to see if you can get the inflammation down to get the pancreas working again. And I guess that has some epigenetic mechanisms. I mean, I would need to know specifically what the person posing the question was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And there was one last question about supplements and weight loss. And because I know that there are a number of conventional medications that have weight gain as side effects. And so are there things that impact the, how do you work with supplements and herbs and botanicals that have that appetite issue?
For weight loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is the natural things that clear, like if you take it and it makes you lose weight, the only ones that do that are kind of dangerous, to tell you the truth. So there's no magic supplement where you take it and people lose weight. But what I find is if you do this naturopathic paradigm of getting good sleep, of course, exercising, eating the right foods, and then working on things like, let's say, blood sugar regulation. A lot of people have cravings because their blood sugar is all up and down. And things like I mentioned before, chromium. I use a type of chromium in my formula called chromium dinicosystinate. And it's a really brilliant way to balance insulin that's shown to work better than even the other chromiums. And in my opinion, rivals medications to help keep blood sugar balanced. And it does it a lot more healthily. So using things like that can be useful. I mentioned before 5-HTP as a supplement, right? So 5-HTP has been shown to help the craving centers of the brain not get so stimulated. So whereas the drugs like Prozac and the SSRIs actually do the opposite. They make you crave food more and more. So 5-HTP can be an amazing way to help people lower anxiety, help depression, gently raise their serotonin, as well as lower food cravings and help with things like weight concerns. There's no one supplement or formula that I think will by itself as a monotherapy really help people lose weight. But I think when you use these things in conjunction, you can really help people in the long term, and not only lose weight, but then help keep that weight off.
Thank you so much. So I know we are over time here, and you've got a busy day and a busy practice, and I apologize I wasn't able to get to all the questions. We tried our best in this time frame, but you did put up your contact information, and I know that we have put up our contact information as well. So if you didn't get your question answered, we'd love to help you out afterwards. I thank you so very much, Dr. Bongiorno, for taking a little bit of time today to present on this really important topic. And thank you again so much for coming.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Yanis. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So it's very exciting. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.